Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Wednesday, November 26th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, what comes next for federal workers after AI takes over the mundane tasks? Plus, when federal judges fear for their families, the entire justice system is under attack. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. Senior executives across government have some new opportunities for development. The Office of Personnel Management has just launched 2 new training series. They'll focus on topics like budget, policy, and human capital management, while also incorporating many of the Trump administration's overhauls to the federal workforce this year. Federal News Network's Drew Friedman got more from OPM Director Scott Cooper.
The reason we designed this new program is the old program was known as FEI, and we made a decision earlier in the year to discontinue that program. The main reason for that was the program was very good. I would say it was lacking in a couple areas. One was just it literally had a physical campus to it, so it required people to be away from office for several days in order to do it, and it was all kind of in-person training. We spent, in the last year, we spent about $22 million in order to get people through that training, and we only got about a third of the SES group through it just because of the cost. Unfortunately, was prohibitive, both in terms of dollars as well as just people's time. The second thing was we felt like the curriculum could use a little bit of an update. And so there's some commonality, obviously, between kind of what we had before and what we have now. But this enables us to do this, number one, at a much lower cost to make it, obviously, remote and accessible to people in a self-paced environment. And then importantly, to be able to add some additional areas that we thought kind of the SES team could benefit from.
So you've talked about this being, in your words, high impact, directly relevant training rather than more generalized management training. And you kind of alluded to that in your answer there, but can you talk about what makes this training more specific or more tailored and kind of more of the development of that?
Yeah, we really try to design it with the principle of, okay, like what do we want the SES team to do in their day-to-day management responsibilities? So if you think about that, right, there's some element of, okay, they've got to understand the basic framework of how like the constitutional system works and obviously what the rights and responsibilities are of the executive branch relative to the other branches. 2 is, we want to make sure they had a deep kind of regulatory understanding, again, of kind of how the rulemaking process works, because these things are obviously, an important mechanism by which we can affect policy in the organization. I would say the other big area that we wanted to spend more time on, which was less developed in the last areas, was around kind of people management skills, performance management. I think you and I have talked about this previously, Drew. We have, unfortunately, a culture so far in terms of performance management in the government that has not really done a good job of differentiating true outstanding performance, and then also in many cases, holding accountable people who are not able to do the jobs we need to do. And so we wanted to kind of really give them a refresher and a sense of kind of at least what we expect of senior leaders in the organization. And then the last area, I'll call it leadership for lack of a better word, which is a little bit, obviously can be a soft subject, but there were things like, for example, some sense of kind of financial skills, financial planning, thinking about headcount planning, stuff that, again, is not, through no fault of their own, was never really a core part of kind of what we thought of and what we expected in the SES job. And certainly as, in this administration, as you well know, we think about kind of making efficiency a first-class citizen in government. We wanted to make sure that we also had some training geared towards those elements as well.
So I know that there's also 2 different training programs that you all are rolling out. Can you talk about maybe the difference between them? Is one better suited for certain types of executives, or how should employees be figuring out which is right for them?
I think the best thing to do is obviously people should go through the actual curriculum that's kind of been published on them so they can understand it. I think they kind of build on one another though, basically. So look, in the perfect world, we would have all SESs, go through both programs, quite frankly. Sometimes that could be just time and cost prohibitive. So we thought we'd at least break it up in a way that was most accessible for the maximum number of people.
And, one of the programs talks in part about, offering some training on President Trump's executive orders and other executive branch priorities. Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit more specifically about what that type of training is going to entail?
The president believes very strongly, as do those of us in the administration, that ultimately, kind of what the president affects through executive orders really reflects, the administration's priorities in terms of policymaking. And so part of what we want to do is take people through that process, help them understand it, help them understand how we go from an executive order to the implementation of that order. But some of the things, again, that you and I have talked about, things like merit hiring, for example, is a very important concept in terms of reshaping the federal workforce. And so we want to make sure people understand the principles behind the merit hiring process, again, performance management. So things that basically are kind of within the bailiwick of what we expect managers to do that are now represented in the form of executive orders. We want to make sure people really do understand both the derivation of those as well as kind of how we think about the appropriate implementation of those policies.
Thank you. And then just a question about the actual development of these training programs. You mentioned that the Federal Executive Institute, for example, was taken down earlier this year. I know there was also OPM previously had a Center for Leadership Development that was partially had a reduction in force occur there. So who was really involved in the development of these products? And, for example, were there contractors involved, or how did this really get up and started?
Yeah, so this was driven mostly internal to OPM, a group called HRS, our Human Resources Services Group, which is, again, where the other leadership development training programs existed. I would say in many respects, we bootstrapped this in the sense that we looked for experts either within government or outside of government that we could bring in. And so as you may have seen, I don't know if you've been through it at all, but a lot of the training is kind of conversations that are happening between people who've led different organizations on different topics, so that it's, again, very kind of hopefully very hands-on, practically oriented, as opposed to some like academic theories of how management should be done. And then the other thing I would just add, just so your viewers have a sense, is look, there's a lot more that can be done, and OPM doesn't have this view that, look, we need to own and develop everything. So I think there are conversations that we're just starting now, but there's plenty of organizations external to OPM who, to the extent they have kind of ways in which they can help us further develop the curriculum, we're very, very open to that. So really the main goals here are making sure the curriculum reflects, again, what we expect of the SES, and then importantly, look, efficiency and making sure people have both the cost is not prohibitive as well as people have the time to do things. Those are the main goals. So to the extent third parties can help us do that, we're very, very open to that.
Scott Cooper is director of the Office of Personnel Management, speaking there with Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. You can find Drew's story and the full interview at federalnewsnetwork.com. Still to come, when federal judges fear for their families, the entire justice system is under attack. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. 40 former state attorneys general signed a letter urging Congress to fund judicial security after threats tracked by the U.S. Marshal Service surged in recent years. Federal News Network's Jared Serbu spoke with former Arkansas Attorney General Dustin McDaniel to learn how federal judges took the unprecedented step of asking for help and what's driving intimidation from federal courtrooms to state judiciaries nationwide.
Mr. McDaniel, let's talk a little bit about some of the underlying factors and reasons why you organized this letter in the first place. What has changed that concerns you enough to take this step in recent days, weeks, months?
Well, we've seen a significant increase in threats on the judiciary, both at the state and federal level, for the last several years. We pointed out that threats have increased significantly as per the numbers from the U.S. Marshal Service, and that doesn't even count state judicial officials. And honestly, we were aware of it, but earlier this year, a group of incumbent, actively serving federal judges reached out to me and my co-chair of SAGE, the Society of AGs Emeritus in Nebraska, John Bruning, and they asked specifically for former attorneys general to use their voices as lawyers and as former chief law enforcement officials in our states to encourage Congress to focus on the issue. And that was a very unusual thing. We've never had federal judges ask us honestly for anything. And so it drew our attention to the fact that they must genuinely be afraid for themselves, their families, and the integrity of the judicial system. So that was the first thing that sparked it. I will also tell you that back in September, I was in New Jersey for a meeting of attorneys general, and Federal Judge Esther Salas spoke to the group. And she had the most tragic story, which she has been telling across the nation. But as a federal judge, she was targeted for assassination. And the man came to her home, and her son and husband made it to the front door before she did. And her husband was shot several times and survived, but her son was murdered. And she was the intended target. And since that time, she has been an evangelist around the country trying to raise awareness that these threats are not just against individual members of the judiciary, but against our judicial system as a whole, undermining the rights and liberties of every single American. So between the call this summer and hearing Judge Salas speak so personally about her own experience, we felt moved to try to do what we could.
And judges generally, don't go out and hold a press conference every time they receive one of these threats, and they probably don't get the media or public attention that they probably otherwise would if they were to do something like that. I mean, what's your sense of how commonplace these sorts of things are becoming that just sort of escape public attention because the U.S. Marshal Service, the statistics keeping agency, is really the only one tracking it?
Well, I know that when I was Attorney General, we had a political assassination in Arkansas of a high-ranking official, and that prompted me to do internal security reviews in our own office. And I had no idea how many threats that I, as the AG, was getting on a rather frequent basis. And so we have seen attorneys general significant. At that time, security for AGs was kind of the exception. Today, it's the norm. And you talk to attorneys general who never thought they would want or need to have part-time or even full-time security detail, and it's because of the credibility and frequency of the threats against them and their families that they simply have no choice. We are hearing that at the same level in the judiciary. After Judge Salas's son Daniel's tragic and senseless murder, we have seen a significant increase in threats on judges in the form of pizza deliveries. Federal judges at their home will receive late at night an unordered pizza delivery, and the name on the pizza will be Daniel, which is Judge Salas's dead son's name. That only signal to a federal judge is we know who you are, we know where you are, and you know that we are sending you a message, whoever they are. Even if that never results in violence, that clearly is intimidating and upsetting and undermining the independence and security of our judicial system, which again is about more than just the judges. It's about the people.
Have you seen any indications, and this is impossible to quantify, I realize, that this change in the threat environment is influencing either the ways or the actual content of judicial decisions? Do we have any indication that it's playing a role in how the judiciary operates?
Well, we have always known that jurors, who are judicial officials, even though they're ordinary citizens, when they are serving as a member of a jury, they are judicial officials, critical. And we know that intimidation and bribery of jurors has long been a concern. And we do have specific cases of that. I don't have any specific cases that I can cite where a federal judge folded under threat or pressure and ruled in a way that he or she would not have ruled otherwise. But they're human beings. And of course, they're going to have to take some of that into consideration. And it certainly makes it harder. The federal judges that I talk to, most of whom, they're all underpaid. Our federal judges are underpaid. They certainly could make more money in private practice if they didn't commit themselves to a lifetime of service to the nation. And the ones I talk to do it because they believe it's their duty and their patriotic duty to the country to serve in that capacity. So what I'm seeing from judges is a a strong resilience and a commitment that they're not going to be intimidated and they are going to do their jobs despite these threats, which makes them all the more important for us to protect them. And certainly their families didn't sign up for that risk and duty. And so the fact that they continue to go to work and make tough decisions every day is they're used to it when they are sentencing mob bosses. They're not used to it when just their ordinary daily duties lead to just crazy people in their community targeting them for violence, often for political reasons.
And so part of the ask in the letter is increased funding and more security kind of throughout the Article 3 world. What would that actually look like in practice? And are there obvious gaps that you see right now that's kind of low-hanging fruit that needs to be taken care of right away?
Well, we got 40, the former attorneys general of 40 states and the District of Columbia and I think 3 territories to sign on to this letter, because we recognize that the problem has to be addressed. That being said, we stop short of trying to tell Congress how to do their job. That Congress can appropriate money, and I think everybody trusts the U.S. Marshal Service to know their jobs and know how to fill the gaps once they get adequate funding and resources. I know from my own experience that, they have proactive means to where they are looking for threats, even those that have not made themselves known. And then they have a reactive function to react once a threat comes in or someone says or does something that gets on their radar. I trust the U.S. Marshal Service to do their job well as long as they're given adequate resources and time and personnel to do it. And make no mistake, this is only at the federal level. It was not practical for us to send a similar letter to every state legislature in the country. However, this is a pressing issue in every state in America.
What's behind all that? Because the fact that this is happening both, in federal cases that may receive a lot of media attention or politically charged in some way, that it's not isolated to those and that it's also extending to state courts, kind of points to some sort of broader, I almost want to say cultural problem. I don't know what it is. What's your take on what's behind all this? And, to the extent we can point to those things, are there things that can be done, again, to take your point on proactive versus reactive, to tamp down those threats instead of just responding to them?
Well, it's a way bigger issue than any one person can really address. And my opinion on how it's come to be is just like anyone else's. But we've certainly seen in the last 30 years a rise in school shootings, mass casualty events, online hostility, people venting their tempers in ways that would have not been anticipated, much less considered acceptable not that long ago. There are angry people in our society. Why they're angry, everyone's got their opinion on that. How they manifest their frustrations, regardless of whether they're with the economy or their elected officials or the judicial system or things that are much more personal. There are outlets, but one outlet that is simply not acceptable and that we cannot tolerate is threatening those people that we as a society entrust to hold folks accountable, to enforce our rights, to keep us safe in our own homes. We can't expect any of that of the judiciary if they themselves are under daily threat.
Dustin McDaniel is former Attorney General of Arkansas and co-chair of the State Attorney General Practice Group at Cozen O'Connor. He's speaking there with Federal News Network's Jared Serbu. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, the first step in a veteran's disability claim can make or break the outcome. But first, what comes next for federal workers after AI takes over the mundane tasks? You're listening to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Future Tech Enterprise fed 29 years of procurement responses into an AI model and cut an RFQ team from 7 people to 1. Federal News Network's Eric White spoke with their CEO, Bob Venero, to understand why he believes DoD should use the same technology to evaluate its own bids faster and cheaper.
The advent of AI is here, whether you want to or not. It is going to be probably a part of any future initiatives that we see within the federal government. Let's start out with an overview, and we'll kind of go from there of what you're seeing. This is obviously a changing times within the federal realm. As somebody like yourself, what's your viewpoint?
As we look at AI in the federal government, but also in the companies that support the federal government, like the Northrop Grummans of the world, the Raytheons, AI is extremely important in helping them accomplish mission, right? Whether that mission is for the warfighter or whether that mission is for the Veterans Administration or any of the other areas within the government. And what we're seeing is there's a tremendous amount of pilots that are happening within those government agencies, because at the end of the day, right, AI means something different to everybody, right? And really if you look at it, what is going to be the business outcome of some type of AI strategy or AI automation that you as an agency or as a federal systems integrator are trying to accomplish, right? And that's the key factor. Look, I want to say there's no magic behind the curtain as it relates to what AI is. Right? It's things that are going to happen at speed and scale tied to incredible technologies from companies like NVIDIA, right? Who are really, I look at them as the grandfather of AI. And actually, I think next week is NVIDIA's GTC event in DC, right? Really geared towards the government and, what AI is doing for them. So, as we look at different areas within the different government spaces, automation is key. Right, having the proper language models in there to support the large language models to support what those agencies are trying to do, right? And then really protecting and the security around what those AI models are going to do and the guardrails that the government has to have, which is different than the bad actors around, right, their AI testing processes and procedures.
Yeah, that's been one thing I've been curious about as large language models and other AI tools start being implemented, and the idea of contractors competing for different jobs. How are government officials going to judge who has the better large language model, or who's piggybacking off of who? Just getting your thoughts on what the future in that realm will look like.
Well, when you look at that, and that's a great question, right? And people are saying, hey, prove to me that you didn't use an AI model to do that, right? And I look at it and say, if I'm smart enough to use that AI model, you should be looking at me because I'm going to be innovative and smart to help accomplish the goal. I don't necessarily look at it as a bad thing, right? Who is going to leverage the proper tools that are out there to accomplish the job in the most efficient, effective, and cost-based area, right? And I think that's key for people to start to look at. There's a lot of things that you'll see now when people actually do interviews. They're asking them, are you doing this interview with AI or not with AI? And, you have to attest it, but to me, that is counter to what AI is looking to do for everybody, right? It's about speed, accuracy, and automation. And if someone knows how to leverage it better, that's probably the person that you want, because those tools are going to be in your environment. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad opportunity or they're a bad contractor or there's a bad, comparative against large language models. It's who's using the technology to the best of its ability to accomplish the goals and the business outcomes. That's the answer, right?
How much help will it provide on the bottom line, do you think, as far as budgets are getting tighter and tighter? How much more will this provide?
No, budgets are fine. Yeah. As we look at what AI can accomplish, and automation is a lot of that AI conversation, because when you can do automation, then you can take people out of the mundane tasks that are just labor intensive and have them focus on better things to do that are more thought provoking within their environment. So, it will make a difference as far as cost is concerned, because if I have an individual that, we're paying $150,000 a year, And we had him doing tasks that were mundane because it was a part of his, job description. And now we can automate that and have him do more thought-provoking things. That's better for the environment that we're going to put him in, but it's also better for the bottom line because now I can do things quicker, more efficient, and more effective. And now I can come in under budget potentially. So as budgets become more and more strained, AI becomes a much better tool, right? But, the big fear, and I'm talking about this at a event next week, where am I going to lose my job to AI, right? And it's a very broad question, like we talked to, and you shouldn't lose your job to AI. And if you do lose your job to AI, then you weren't focusing on really what your career was in your future. Because if AI can just take the job away, right, then you haven't built value for yourself as an individual, right? It's about how AI can help you do your job better, faster. And, right now the question is accuracy, right? Because there's a lot of mistakes that happen within that model. And, you can use any of the, whether it's Grok or Chat GPT, and you ask it a question that you know the answer to, and you know that the answer they gave you is wrong. And then you just say, are you sure? And you prompt that in, and they're like, you're right. Actually, I did make a mistake. Now that I thought about it, right, here's what it is. So it's not even a question about, is that model 100% accurate? If you're taking that as the rule of law, then you're going to be in a situation where it's going to come back and bite you in the butt.
We're speaking with Bob Venero. He's the senior president and CEO of Future Tech Enterprise. Yeah, that's been the selling point of this technology, is faulting whatever the doomsdayers say about loss of job, that, it will help automate and free you up from those mundane tasks. Are we already seeing that, or when is that going to kick in? Because I still find myself doing a lot of data entry here, Bob.
Yeah. I think it's definitely happening, not as efficiently and effective as it should, and that's because we haven't been educated properly on prompt engineering, right? If you don't know how to ask the AI model the question the right way, it's going to take you longer sometimes to get to the end result. So there's a whole education cycle that needs to happen on, how to create the right prompting to ask the right questions to get to your end result and goal. And I think that's going to develop over time. So right now we're in the infancies of it. I can tell you that it definitely helps in some of the mundane tasks that are tied to, hey, I want to write a brief about something. Here is my topic, right? It gets you 80% there, and then you have to go in and adjust it. But that 80% has saved you a lot of time, effort, right, from starting it from the beginning to the end. But then you need to validate what it is, the end result, and make sure your answers are correct. So, we're not quite there yet. I think in the next 12 to 18 months, you'll see a big difference as these models become more and more intelligent in supporting the businesses that they're handling, the government agencies that they're handling, whatever the area that it is, because it's all about the data. And, I know I can't curse, but it is YouTube. I might be able to curse a little bit, but shit in, shit out, right? And that is, from a data perspective, extremely important as these models become trained.
We are still a radio station, so I may have to bleep it for that version.
Yeah, we can bleep that.
We can keep that in there for the online ones. Specifically speaking, let's zero in on the defense side of things. Where from a warfighter perspective could this technology even work out for the Department of Defense? Obviously, loaded question, a lot of things the Department of Defense is doing, but I'm talking about, in the procurement contract world, could this technology be of assistance?
Oh, without a doubt, right? So a lot of times when the agencies like the DoD, right, they put out an RFQ for some type of solution, they've got criteria that they need to look at and vet each time the respondent is doing what they're doing. And that criteria now can be handled by AI versus an individual having to compare hundreds or thousands of pages of response, going through it, making sure, pulling out the key areas in there, and then evaluating them across each other, right? And I think that's very important as you take a look at the speed of getting things done. What we're seeing in the organizations, the systems integrators like the Northrop, right, is speed is so important to them. Now to be able to respond to something accurately, efficiently, and be there first versus somebody else who maybe isn't leveraging those tools is key. And now if the Department of Defense can use those same tools to evaluate and compare and contrast versus the human eye, it's a game changer. It really, really is. And it can give you weighted results, right, against each of the potential bidders on there and pick what it believes is the right solution based on your criteria. But then you still have that human intervention that says, okay, let's really weigh the results here. Thank you for giving me the information. I see it this way, but Northrop Grumman performed better than BAE did on this or vice versa, right? And there's historics that you can take a look at from a DoD perspective. So I think the more and more it's adopted within that space, the more efficient those agencies can become, the quicker they can give awards, and the better the cost base will be. It's going to reduce their cost as well.
Yeah, and the bidders may be able to use it if they have to go through a lengthy RFQ, right?
Without a doubt, right? I mean, even Future Tech as a company, right, we do a lot of RFQs because we support a lot of the federal systems integrators. And we have an AI tool now that we took over. We've been in business 29 years of responses, and we fed it into the large language model. And so now when something comes across the plate, I don't have to have a team of 7. Hey, pull from this, pull from that, pull from here, pull from that. The AI goes in, it looks at the criteria, it then pulls it in and helps us write a draft of what the response is, right, with the key things that we've had. And that's been amazing from a time reduction perspective and from a personnel and skill perspective.
Yeah, pointing it back at yourself, you gave that example. What are you having those 7 folks do now that you don't have to have them digging through all of that paperwork?
Yeah, here's a perfect example, right? The person now who heads up our RFQ team, she wanted to expand and be a part of the onboarding and training for individuals that come into the company. And so now she has a dual role in the organization. Then that role wasn't there before, but now we created this additional role. She's got both of them. She has the time to do it based on the tools that are there. And now from an onboarding and training perspective, we're going to bring in an AI module that's going to help her with that as well. Right. So if you're embracing it properly, right, it is going to take you to places that are good. I always use this analogy. I'm a boater, right? And everybody, years ago, you had 2 sticks when you had 2 engines, right? You had sticks for left and right and back and forth. And yes, and then they came out with a joystick, right? And the joystick is just like we know. You turn the joystick left, it goes left, turn it right, back, forward. All intelligence built into it. The key and smart thing about what that has done, I used to get yelled at. You're a cheater. You know, you're not learning the old way. I'm like, no, I'm actually smart, right? Because it's a lot easier to do it this way. I can get to my route quicker and I can park a lot more easy. It's the same thing with these tools, right? Embrace them, bring them into your environment, leverage them out there, and it'll help you as an organization, but also any of the agencies that do it, it will help them be more efficient, effective, right? And that's important right now tied to cost and cost reduction.
I'm all for that. There's nothing more uncomfortable than watching your friend attempt to park a boat. So
yeah, exactly.
Bob Venero is CEO of Future Tech Enterprise. Thank you so much for joining us. This is great.
Great. Appreciate the time.
And you can find this interview on our website. Head to federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
Still to come, the first step in a veteran's disability claim can make or break the outcome. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Contracted medical exams are the foundation for determining disability benefits, but GAO says oversight gaps put exam quality and veterans' benefits at risk. We'll discuss what needs fixing and why it matters with GAO Director Elizabeth Kurta. Ms. Kurta, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
The veteran disability claim adjudication process has been in the news quite a bit lately, and GAO recently completed an assessment of the first stage of that process, the disability exam itself. Before we get into what you found in that report, just give us a feel for how the disability exam process works.
Sure. The disability exam process is an important component in the decisions that VA has to make about a veteran's claim for disability. So, for example, if a veteran was injured during their service in Iraq and they have ongoing hearing problems, but they don't have medical records to substantiate that, they might be asked to do a medical disability exam to establish that they have that condition that it's connected to their service.
How much does the VA spend on this, and do they do it all in-house?
It's a very costly program. It used to be done within the VHA hospital systems, Veterans Health Administration, but in recent years, they have shifted most of the work to contractors, and VA spends about $5 billion. That was the expenditure in 2024, and the contractors do over 90% of all the disability exams.
So as GAO got into this report, what motivated you to start it, and what did you find?
Well, we had a request from the chairman of the House VA committee, that's the Subcommittee on Disability and Memorial Affairs, Chairman Luttrell, to look at the quality of these exams. You know, when you have a contractor performing a function for the government, your toolbox in terms of keeping that contractor accountable, you have to be able to show you have oversight over the quality of the work that they're doing, in addition to things like timeliness. And so they wanted to know, what is VA doing to oversee the quality of these exams? And so we took a comprehensive look at all aspects of their oversight, and we found that overall they had a lot of processes in place for oversight in the areas such as preventing errors, detecting errors that occur, and correcting them after the fact. So a lot going on, but we did find some areas for improvement and made recommendations.
I can imagine that the distribution of contracted providers for this service is nationwide, so that oversight is especially critical in helping to ensure that a veteran in Indiana has a similar experience and quality as a veteran in Texas or California. What were the sorts of challenges that you discovered?
Well, we made 5 recommendations that cut across 3 broad areas. And those broad areas were, we found breakdowns in some of their procedures for identifying and correcting the most frequent or complex issues with exams. We found issues with financial incentive payments that they make to the contractors. We found errors, and that resulted in overpayments. And we saw a gap in an important source of feedback, which is the examiners themselves. VA gets feedback from all different parties, the contracting companies, the veterans, but they didn't have any way to get direct feedback from examiners who are doing the day-to-day work.
The part of VA that administers this is the Veterans Benefit Administration, not the Health Administration portion of VA. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so VBA not only manages these exams, but also the full disability determination requirement. They must be stretched pretty thin.
That is correct. We have been reporting for years that they are on our high-risk list for managing their workloads. And that is basically the influx of claims and being able to handle those in a timely basis. So yes, they have been historically stretched pretty thin.
I'm speaking with Elizabeth Curda. She's a director in the Education, Workforce, and Income Security team at GAO. So Elizabeth, then tell us more about the recommendations that you made particularly.
Sure. We made recommendations over 2 years. Our initial report on this was last September in a hearing, and we had a recommendation for a process that VBA conducts in which they feed to the contractors on a quarterly basis the most frequent errors. The contractors are required on a quarterly basis to write a report to VA on what they're going to do to correct those errors. Now, we found that VA did not have complete and effective practices for how to review these reports. So they had, the quality review people would get these reports back from the contractors, and then everyone would write a little summary based on sort of what they thought they should be doing. But there wasn't any procedures for what should they be looking for in these reports. And the 2 things that we found that were missing were nobody checks to see if the contractors go back and actually do these actions. So there's no checking to see if the contractors are fixing things. And there's no effort to determine if those actions were effective or not. Are they seeing the errors go down? What's the outcome of all this work? So that was one area. Yes.
It sounds like that might be an opportunity to deploy AI. If you're getting all of these reports in, maybe an AI reviewer could help streamline those and tell you about trends and where to follow up.
Well, that is another topic because that is very complex. And VA is really, we have, discussed some of their efforts with AI, and it's really kind of at its very beginnings. So, but yeah, potentially.
And so what was the second recommendation?
Yeah, so the second area also had to do with oversight of exams, and it has to do with what they call special focus reviews. And these are 3 areas where they're very complex, and they tend to have a high error rate, and it's traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, and Gulf War illness. And so they had a procedure to do these every 2 years, and they had done 1 round of the reviews, but they were late, over a year late, doing another round of reviews. And so we recommended that they basically do the second round of reviews on schedule. We subsequently, in the course of our work, learned that their staff had been cut by about 50%, the folks who were doing this particular function. And so they said, in response to us, that they will be switching to a 3-year cycle, which in our view it's better than no years. But we think the 2-year cycle would be ultimately better because then you identify things that are working, or not working, and can take corrective action sooner. They also have begun negotiations on their new contracts for these contractors, which are long-term, they were multi-years, and things that they're finding from these special focus reviews could be built into those contracts, but only if they're done in a timely manner.
And did you get any feedback from the providers themselves about how this process was working?
Yeah, we checked in with the people who do the disability exams. We call them the examiners, and we randomly selected examiners to talk to. And what we found is universally is they felt they wanted opportunities to provide feedback about the exam process directly to VBA. Currently, the process is, because they work for a contractor, all that feedback would go through the contractor up to VBA. And VBA basically told us we'd get all that feedback. The contractor gives us feedback. But what we heard from the examiners is, they don't always feel they're being listened to. They don't always have their problems addressed. And they also sometimes get conflicting information if they work for more than one contractor. Different contractors will tell them to do things differently, and they don't think that both can be right. But they have a hard time resolving these things themselves.
So better communication, more checking. What else was on the list?
Yeah, the last area had to do with these financial incentive payments. The way VBA incentivizes good performance is they have these 3 areas: quality, timeliness, and customer satisfaction. And they measure for each of the contractors how well they do in those dimensions. And they feed that into a formula that will produce a bonus payment to contractors that score particularly well, and penalties for those that are not meeting basic thresholds. And what we found was the way they calculate these is on a spreadsheet with a lot of manual data entry. And they were doing manual calculations as well. And there wasn't a procedure in place to double check the numbers, the data entry. They were doing some checking, but it wasn't formalized. And so when we reviewed the numbers, we found that VBA had caught some of its errors on its own, but we found some that they hadn't caught. And it was about $2.3 million worth of errors, the bonuses that went out to a contractor that did not earn them. And that really just sends a message that, it's the wrong message. You're getting paid and you didn't actually earn it.
Exactly. How has VBA responded to your findings and recommendations?
VBA agreed, or they use the term agree in principle when they sort of agreed with all the recommendations. They have reported that they're taking action on all of them, and some I think are very close to being implemented, such as the one on financial incentives. They told us there was a hearing on this last week, and they said that they actually have gotten the money back from the contractor, and they are putting in place these new procedures. We just haven't seen that documentation yet, but when we do, we will evaluate whether we can close that one or not. But all of them are sort of in the works, in various stages of completion.
So will you be following up with VBA to check how they're doing?
Oh, certainly. And we always follow up on our recommendations, at least annually, but sometimes more than that, just depending on when they have updates for us.
I've been speaking with Elizabeth Kurta. She's a director in the Education, Workforce, and Income Security team at GAO. Thanks so much for joining me today, and thanks for sharing this important report with us.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
We'll post this interview and a link to this report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The D.C. Armory transformed into a place of gratitude last week as D.C. National Guard members and their families lined up for free Thanksgiving meals at an annual event hosted by the nonprofit Operation Homefront. With grocery prices rising and many service members still feeling the financial strain of the recent shutdown, the organization says demand for assistance has surged. Food requests alone are up 57% from last year. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis spoke with Operation Homefront Senior Director Vivian Dietrich about their Holiday Meals for Military program.
For those who may not be familiar with Operation Homefront, could you tell us what it is, what's your mission, and the type of support you offer military families?
Absolutely. Operation Homefront is a nonprofit. We're national. We cover all the states from Hawaii to Washington, D.C. We've been around since 2002, and our mission is to serve military families. We serve these families to try to keep them strong, stable, and secure, both military and veteran families. And we do this by providing financial, emotional, and social well-being to these families. At Operation Homefront, we have a variety of programs. Like I said, we started in 2002, and we have grown and changed over the years to meet the needs, ever-changing, of the military. In the early seasons, we were overseas in combat, so our services were more slanted towards maybe hospital care or things like that. But we've always had critical financial assistance as a core program. And this is a program that serves E6 and below, the lower pay grades, the junior enlisted, and it allows us to prevent a crisis or a bump in the road that could turn into a long-term financial problem. An example would be car breaks down. You've got a situation here, it's going to run you maybe $1,000 to get it repaired. You don't have any extra funding. Perhaps the spouse is deployed. What do you do? And with working with Operation Homefront, we can help with the repairs for the car and prevent you from doing the obvious: skip your rent payment, skip your mortgage, don't pay your utility bill, and that's only going to snowball. So if you reach out to Operation Homefront, we can work with you in advance and be able to resolve these issues so they don't become a long-term problem. They're grants, it's not a loan, and we always pay the vendor direct. Now, the program we're here today, this is one of my more fun programs I love to do. This is called Holiday Meals for Military, and we actually do it throughout the year, not just in November and December. It focuses on any of the holidays during the year. So it could be the 4th of July. Well, if you want to have a holiday experience, it's going to run you a little bit more money. And where does that come from? Especially when you have children that are always eating up the rest of those dollars that may or may not be left from your pay. We can provide a holiday meal. And right now, with Thanksgiving on the cusp, we have everything that you would need to have the fixings for a traditional Thanksgiving dinner. Stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, all of those things will be handed out today, along with a Harris Teeter gift card that allows you to go to the store and purchase the protein, ham, turkey, chicken, whatever your preference is. So this is a budget relieving, and it's also an opportunity for the families to have camaraderie on Thanksgiving.
Right now, we're at the D.C. Armory, where families are receiving meal kits and gift cards, and you explained a little bit about what they're getting. But could you talk about the origins of the program, what sparked it? I think you started it in 2010. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. The experience was maybe one you maybe have witnessed quietly in a grocery store. It was a gentleman who was with Beam, and he was at the grocery store, and he was standing behind a young couple, soldier and his spouse, and the groceries totaled up, and the cashier asked the young family for $13 and change, and they didn't have it. They were short. And so The gentleman standing behind him with the beam company reached in his pocket, paid the difference of the bill, thanked him for the service, and he immediately came back and told Operation Homefront, this is what I witnessed. These families did not even have enough money to pay for a holiday meal. And the board got together, they got to thinking about it, and it's like, how do we do this? And we immediately began the meals program. And it's been going strong from 2010 to 2025 and into the future.
How has the program grown? How many families are you serving today? And how does that compare to previous years?
Our casework is up quadruple what it was 30 days ago. I mean, undoubtedly, the economic times are difficult for everyone in our country, but there's an urgency and a need, I think, that's greater with the military, just because often a spouse has to give up a position because they moved, so it's loss of income. Moving, there's additional expenses that may occur. These economic times have been a direct impact on our military families. And, you have to continue to give them hope and to let them know that we care.
What are you hearing from military families that you're providing support to, especially since the shutdown began?
The families that we supply the support to, pretty much they always will say to us, I didn't believe it when I read it. I read about you and I'm just thinking it just can't be true. Are you really going to help me pay my utility bill? When we do our casework, often it's somebody calling at the nth hour because their military is very proud. Why are they going to ask for help? And generally when they call, you're at the point that you're desperate, you need support. And our caseworkers are highly trained social workers. They spend time in studying their finances. We work with them on how to manage their money and help them move forward. And if it's a utility bill we'd have to pay, we don't give the funds to the family member. We pay the vendor, but we work with the families to ensure that we understand their total financial situation, and it's not, often they'll just want the utility bill paid because that's the crisis, but they may be delinquent in a car payment. So we want to get to that source and help them be strong, stable, and secure, not just a quick fix.
In terms of the types of assistance that families are requesting, do you see maybe a certain type of assistance that families request more often?
The top request, food. Number one, food. And like I said, that has quadrupled right out of the top. But generally it's food, rent, maybe car payments, utilities, the day-to-day expenses that we all have. But it isn't uncommon that there was some type of crisis that occurred that caused them to fall behind.
All right, Vivian, and before I let you go, for those who want to contribute, who want to help, how can they get involved? What kind of support are you looking for?
Oh, my goodness. Thank you. Operation Homefront has a wonderful website. It's operationhomefront.org. It explains our programs. It gives you contact information. It also shares with you how you can volunteer. The thing about a nonprofit is that what we receive from the community is what we want to give to the families. So we're very lean. I cover down on 8 states. I have a staff of 4. Okay, what do I need? Volunteers. I need people that will help. Even with this event, the volunteers were here this morning, setting up the food, getting everything in place. We need volunteers. And obviously, we need the donations that provide to be able to cover the utility bills. But we have a 4-star rating with Charity Navigator, and 83% of our expenditures go directly to our programs. We're very proud of what we've built across the years, and I think if you go to that website and you look around and, hey, call us, we'll find a place for you.
That's Operation Homefront Senior Director Vivian Dietrich speaking with Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. You can find the full story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.